Hello, everyone. It's me, Mohammed Jaz again, and this is our second episode of Brain, Spine, and Beyond video podcast. We started the podcast a few weeks ago, and our first episode was with Professor Hutchinson. Make sure to watch this through the link above. But today we have also a very special guest, Professor Michael Jenkinson. Thank you for coming for the video podcast and giving us the time to join us for this interview. Professor Jenkinson is a professor of neurosurgery in the Institute of Translational Medicine, University of Liverpool, and the Walton Centre NHS Foundation Trust in Liverpool. He's also a chief investigator for multiple NIHR-funded trials, and he's an SBNS council member and the chair of the academic committee in the SBNS. And he's John Fisher and Royal College of Surgeons of England chair of surgical trials. Prof, thanks again for joining. And there will be a lot of talks in this interview, probably about research, surgical innovation, and meningioma research. And if you don't mind, I'll start with my first question about why neurosurgical research? Why did you choose to become an academic neurosurgeon and to focus on research during your career, and why anyone else should do the same?
Thanks, Mo. Great to be here, and thank you for the invitation and introduction. So why neurosurgical research? Well, I always think that as a neurosurgeon, as a clinician, doctor, you're generally just helping one patient at a time, that patient in front of you in the clinic or in the operating theatre. But if you do research in any aspect of healthcare, you have the potential to make new discoveries, make new changes that will influence how a treatment is practiced, how surgery is practiced. That has the potential to help, many hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people. So that's why neurosurgery research is what I focus on.
Yeah. When still in training and probably still now, when you think about starting a research project, it's always comes as a very hard thing to do, especially if you're working in a place that it's not kind of academically oriented, or they don't have like the infrastructure for such research projects. How do you see this as from a difficulty point of view, and also what's your advice for centers or trainees that don't have this infrastructure? What can they do about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we all have to start somewhere, and what you need to do is start with your idea. So your idea can be something fairly straightforward and simple. So look at existing practice within someone's neurosurgery practice and question to yourself, why do they do it like that? Why does the different surgeon do it in a slightly different way? What's the evidence behind those two techniques? Which is better? Does it not make any difference? They're both equally good. That's a sort of nice segue into thinking about clinical research. You can then sort of build that up by looking at the existing literature. You could audit outcomes between those two techniques, for example. And then if there is a genuine difference, then that can then escalate and grow into, leading into a clinical trial, for example. The other way to get into it is to think about, you might have fundamental biological or scientific questions that you want to know about. What does this molecule do? What does this pathway do? Why don't we understand why we can't cure or treat glioblastomas better, because we don't understand the tumor biology. And so you might end up being focused in that direction. But fundamental to both those aspects, whether you're a lab person, whether you're a clinical researcher, is having the inquisitiveness. So always be asking questions. Is this the right way to do things? It's interesting. I think when we come through a schooling system, most medical students, most doctors will have been at the, in the high level of their class, very high grades, that sort of thing. And then when you start training in medicine, often you're trained to do pattern recognition, follow protocols, follow guidelines, which are very important for delivering good patient care. But sometimes I think we get trained out of asking those questions and challenging why we do things in certain ways. So keeping an open mind, being inquisitive, challenging those established paradigms is the way to think about research.
And as I was asking about the infrastructure, how would a unit either in the UK or outside the UK, let's say in one of the developing countries, or that they don't have a research infrastructure, what can they do in terms of actual steps to make this happen? Let's say, I mean, personally, what I find what I found in a lot of the centers is one of the things is, let's say, data availability. Is if you want to audit something, you might take ages just to try to find the information somewhere in the system, which can take you months and months to find it. So from your experience, what do you think those centers or units should do, to get into this ecosystem or infrastructure for research?
I mean, what you're describing is not unique to smaller centers. So we all have difficulty getting access to data. We all have to question the quality of our data and the integrity of that data. But it might be that you, rather than going to the audit department, you could go to pathology or radiology, screen their records for the particular question that you're interested in. There is certainly within the UK healthcare, the good clinical practice guidelines. Everyone should be embedding research within their clinical practice, auditing their own outcomes, asking those questions, contributing to research, to clinical trials. But I agree, if you're trying to build something up in a smaller unit, smaller department, the key is to start small, start with the low-hanging fruit, start with the easy wins. And once you've done that, you've got your research methodology, you've got some research experience, then you can build it up to bigger questions and bigger projects.
And as you do have this experience, I know that you probably get a lot of trainees and a lot of people coming to you with loads of ideas about projects and that they want to develop or work on, either with yourself or under your supervision. How do you decide about prioritizing which project to work on and which one is not?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we all have a limited amount of time that we can devote or dedicate to certain projects or to supervising people. So the first thing to say is that if people come with an idea, don't immediately shut it down. Always listen to that idea, listen to what they're proposing. If it sounds valid, if it sounds viable, then you have to empower that individual to go away and develop that project. You have to give them a bit of help and support and resource. What you can do is you can make good use of other trainees within the system. So other neurosurgery trainees, you might have people who are out of program doing research. So if you've got that collegiate infrastructure, then you can help other trainees come along. Because ultimately, you want people to be coming up with new ideas. When you get to my stage in my career, I've still got new ideas, but what I have is the experience and the expertise to know how to deliver those ideas. And it's the newer generation, the trainees coming up, who will have better ideas than me, but I can help them realize those ideas. That's what I see more of my role as these days.
So my question is, you have done a lot of research projects and a lot of work and clinical trials. What's the project that you say, okay, I'm very proud of this project? That's your biggest achievement in your career, and why did you choose that one?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I'll give you a slightly flippant answer, which is my greatest project, I think, is building a research team, building up academic neurosurgery within Liverpool. But if we drill down into a specific project or trial, then probably the basics trial is the one that's had the most impact. So this trial, the basics trial. So this was actually, the trial idea was developed by my good colleague and friend, Professor Michael, a pediatric neurosurgeon in Liverpool. So he came up with the idea, and I was very early in my consultant career. And I came along as his sort of co-pilot to build up this project. And this is a great trial. So it was a very simple trial of trying to work out, can we reduce shunt infection rates and did antibiotic shunts and silver shunts, which were brand new to the market, did they reduce the infection compared to the standard plain shunts that everyone was using? And this was the first major trial that we ran, the biggest grant that we'd got in. It was over £2 million contract from the NIHR. We recruited over 1,600 patients, and this trial definitively showed that the infection rate in antibiotic shunts reduced from 6% down to 2%, but that silver shunts didn't reduce your infection rate. And that research was published in the Lancet, which was great, but more importantly, we've looked at data from the UK Shunt Registry, and that actually shows that the real-world infection rate remains low, and that pretty much everyone in the UK is using antibiotic shunts now. So that's had a real impact in terms of helping patients, so reduce shunt infection, and it's changed clinical practice, and it's going to be introduced into the GIRFT recommendations, getting it right first time for cranial neurosurgery. So that's probably the biggest, most impactful piece of research I've done in my career so far. Most of my meningioma trials that I'm running are going to come to fruition in the next few years. It might be that they overtake basics as my proudest bit of research, but let's see. I can't predict the future.
Okay, I mean, it's I had the basics on my list, and as you mentioned, I didn't want to say that it could be the basics, but I thought it would probably be your choice.
Yeah,
and I agree. I mean, it made a huge change in terms of for the patients, and also saving money and preventing infection, which is the biggest nightmare for any shunt patient, to be honest. So I think that's kind of real change in practice, which we would love to see with all the research projects. So as you touched upon the meningioma research, which is something that you focus a lot on, can you give us like an overview of the work that you're doing at the moment, the work that has been done, and what's the future, plan for your projects about meningioma, and how would you love to see this over the next few years as a result out of these projects?
Yeah, so for meningiomas, it's the commonest primary brain tumor, and up till about maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was really very little research done in meningiomas. As a surgeon, we used to cut them out. We said we cured everybody, and then off they went, and we didn't really worry about people with meningiomas. But it became apparent when I was sort of building up my career that there are different aspects of meningiomas. So there's, we tried to look at the whole pathway. So what do you do about those incidental ones? Incidental meningiomas, you find them on a scan for another reason. How often do you follow them up? How can you discharge people? So that became a nice piece of work called the impact study. That was led by one of my trainees, Abed Islam, who's now in Manchester. He started out with me as a intercalating medical student, and he's carried that project for about 10 years now, all the way through to being currently out of program doing a PhD in Manchester. And through that work, initially nationally and then now internationally, he's shown that we can model and accurately predict risk of growth and risk of intervention. So that's a really neat project. In the middle of it, we've looked at sort of quality of life issues in people having surgery. We've looked at the role of radiation after surgery for grade 2 meningiomas. And then we're currently running a study looking at seizure prophylaxis in meningiomas. Do we need anti-seizure medication when we operate, or should we not be giving it at all because it makes no difference to people's seizure outcomes? So I've tried to build a meningioma program around the whole pathway, looking at different aspects of meningioma care. What do I think is for the future? What would be really great? And this would require international efforts. And I'm very fortunate through my meningioma work to meet some fantastic people. Galere Zade in Toronto, Felix Sam in Heidelberg, David Riley in San Francisco, Matthias Preusser in Vienna. Lots of people doing fantastic work in meningiomas. But what we really need is for that small number of patients with recurrent meningiomas or highly aggressive meningiomas, we need better treatments. So what we really need, some clever drugs that actually work and actually put these meningiomas into remission. They're not going to get rid of them. We shouldn't kid ourselves, but if they can put them into remission, that would be absolutely fantastic. So for me, if I could leave my career and leave my research in meningioma, having answered a few straightforward questions, and then with people running trials, drug trials to try and help meningiomas, that would be fantastic. I would see that as a fantastic legacy to the meningioma literature and for meningioma patients for the future.
Then you think that will probably outperform the basics on your list?
Well, if it all comes off, then maybe. But basics, I still think is my biggest. Without basics, I would have no meningioma program. That was the genesis for me, was the basics. And I do have to thank Conor Malucci for letting me get involved with that. So yeah.
That's good. And if anyone like watching this podcast and would like to get involved in your work for meningioma or the clinical trials that are being run either in the UK or worldwide, how can they get involved, or is it a way, or is still a chance that they get involved in such work?
Yeah, so within the UK, for any UK open clinical trials, we're always looking for additional sites. So for my seizure and meningioma trial called STOP'em, then you can drop me an email at michael.jenkinson@live.ac.uk, and if we've got space, we will try and accommodate new sites. Sort of worldwide, internationally, we can't really run those trials overseas, but if people are out there and they want to collaborate on other meningioma projects, then again, they're more than welcome to drop me a line. I do try to reply to pretty much every email. Even if that's a no, I can't really help, I will still try to respond to email contacts.
Yeah. Perfect. So in terms of clinical trials, definitely that's a very challenging kind of thing to do and very challenging to set up, and it takes years, as you just explained. What's your kind of 3 or 4 lines of advice for someone in academic neurosurgery or neurosurgical research who wants to start a clinical trial? From your experience, what this advice would be, or the most important things that they have to do?
Yeah, so the first and foremost, it's got to be an important question, and that's not just important to you as the doctor. It's got to be important to the patients and the patient community. Is it a worthwhile question to answer through a clinical trial? You cannot do a clinical trial on your own. You need a huge team around you: statisticians, trial methodologists, health economists. So you need to build a good team around you. And then the third thing is, it's not a quick win. So you're in it for the long haul. Basics, for example, that took us about 9 or 10 years from the initial idea to getting funding to delivering the trial to publishing the paper. So that's almost a decade's worth of work for one paper. So don't do it for a quick CV win. It's a long haul. But you can answer some really fundamental, important questions through clinical trials. They're still considered the gold standard for defining healthcare. So they are very worthwhile doing.
I always, ask myself is, as you're saying about the basics, and it took you like 10 years, would you be worried at any stage during those 10 years that some like innovation comes up that treats, hydrocephalus in a better way, and you don't need shunts, or like a new shunt system that is out of the blue is way better than others, and then that means that the whole clinical trial kind of fails apart? Is that something that you worry about?
Well, if somebody came up with a pill to treat hydrocephalus, they deserve the Nobel Prize for medicine. So I would, I welcome that with open arms, right? But yeah, you always have to be aware that healthcare is evolving and medicine's evolving and people are making new discoveries. That doesn't make your work invalid. It just means that it is no longer relevant to their current healthcare scenario. So, if, for example, my meningioma trial where we gave radiotherapy versus not radiotherapy, if somebody suddenly came up with here's a new drug that you can give to these types of tumors, you don't need radiotherapy anymore, that would be great because you'd avoid the harm of radiotherapy by giving a drug. You'd still be able to publish your results. You'd still be able to say, this is what we found. So I think it still has validity. The other thing we shouldn't, within neurosurgery, it's a relatively slow moving specialty compared to others. Cardiology, some oncology, cancer types, there's new drugs coming out all the time. So things move much more quickly. But neurosurgery, it's a slightly slower pace.
Quite slow. And touching upon this point about the changes coming up in research in general, but with a focus on neurosurgical research, how do you see the changes, especially with coming things like AI, and how do you see this would affect the neurosurgical research over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. I mean, it's here already, isn't it? AI, ChatGPT, it's here.
Yeah.
These are tools we have to use. We can't pretend they don't exist. Nobody's digging holes in the road with teaspoons and shovels. People are using a mechanical digger. So it's a tool that you've got to use and you've got to embrace it. I did ask ChatGPT, how do we cure glioblastoma? Disappointingly, it didn't give me the answer. So I'm sure everyone's tried that. But you've just got to use these tools. So if you can use these tools to try and design better trials, to try and improve healthcare outcomes, then we should embrace them and use them. I don't see a problem with it. Part of my role for the next year or two, so I'm currently the vice president for the SBNS, and I have a portfolio to look at research, impact, and innovation. So we're going to be running some innovation sessions at the Cork SBNS in spring 2025. We're going to run a session at the British Neuroscience Association Festival of Science in April in Liverpool in 2025. And then the BNRG later in the year in November 2025 is going to have a strong research and innovation theme as well. So all those things are coming, and we need to embrace these technologies.
Okay, so Prof, I mean, we're talking about the surgical innovation, and I think the UK market is probably a little bit kind of lagging behind in terms of translating in research into like actual products in the market, like medical devices and things like that, in comparison to the US. So what do you think needs to be done for the UK, in the UK or other countries who would like to develop like an easy strategy for such research to be developed into medical devices product that can compete in an international market, especially for neurosurgery?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm not an expert in patent law or in innovation. I'm not a angel investor or anything like that. However, the things that do well are the things that have broad application. So there was a fantastic talk at the British Neurosurgery group meeting in November last year from a person who'd taken was a sort of investor, and they'd found a product that was being used in a particular condition, but it had a much better application in a range of other conditions. And he was very clear in explaining that those sorts of products are much more likely to get traction and get investment because they have a broader application. Don't invent it for one single thing, was his advice. Make sure it's got a broad application. On a slightly broader note, though, so I'm currently the Vice President for Research, Innovation and Impact for the SBNS, so that's a 2-year post. And we're running a series of events in 25 and 2026 around the theme of innovation in neurosurgery. So we've got talks coming up at the SBNS in Cork. The BNRG in London in November is going to have a research and innovation theme. And effectively, we need to sort of embrace these new technologies. We need to embrace AI and machine learning, they're here as tools. We've got to use them. That's the only way we're going to sort of, improve the devices or the technologies that we can use in neurosurgery.
Perfect. And what's your, I asked you this question to Prof. Hutchinson in the last episode, but I'll probably ask you the same question because it's important that you get advice from people who has been in your place before. Is what's your advice for younger generation of neurosurgeons, either just neurosurgeons or people who are keen to be academic neurosurgeons? What's your top 3 advices for them on what they should do and what they should focus on, just to save them time and not to do similar mistakes that you might have done in your career?
Oh man, if I advised them not to make the same mistakes as me, they wouldn't be neurosurgeons. How about that? But seriously, okay, so first things first, find an important topic area and something that's interesting to you as a person. If you're interested in it and it's important, it will sustain you. Number 2, try and find good mentorship and support. So that might be within your own unit, but it might be that you have to go externally to get help and support for that. And the third one is, if you want a successful academic career, then be prepared for failure. So failure is not failing. Failure is version 2. So you have to think of it like that. So always realize that, we put in lots of grant applications, 80-90% of my grant applications are unsuccessful. But there always will become success part 2 when you rebadge them, repurpose them for something else. So be prepared for some failure, but turn that to your success.
So as you just mentioned about the failures, my question is, which one failure that happened to you that you think is the one that the biggest one that disappointed you or hurt you?
Okay, so back in 2015, we'd got the basics trial funded. We were up and running with that. And then I was encouraged to transition from a full-time NHS contract to a university contract. And my organization, University of Liverpool, said, why don't you apply for an NIHR research professorship? Mm-hmm. So these are quite highly prestigious. Prof. Hutchinson's had one. They recognize the best and the brightest, which is probably why he got one. So I put together a project around meningiomas, looking at incidental meningiomas, radiotherapy of meningiomas, drug treatments, biology of meningiomas. And I thought I put together a fairly good package. And then I got my feedback. So obviously they give you feedback on project, place, and person. And I scored a C on all of them. So C means unfundable. So unsuitable project, unsuitable person, and unsuitable place. So that's my biggest failure. However, I took all those projects, repurposed them all, and I've done the impact study on incidental meningiomas, the Rome study on grade 2 meningiomas and radiotherapy, STOP'em for seizure prophylaxis, and we're working with international collaborators on the biology and future drug trials. So there you go. I've turned my greatest failure into some of my biggest future successes.
And was that a challenge just to say, okay, I need to prove them wrong, or was that something else?
Well, I guess there was a bit of, I need to prove you all wrong, but there was also, I think these are good questions, so I'm going to go ahead and answer them anyway. And I got good, so there you go. There you go.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, good. My last question to you is about work-life balance, which might sound a bit weird to ask a neurosurgeon about work-life balance, especially if he's doing a lot of academic work as well. But do you think it actually exists for neurosurgeons? That's question number 1. And number 2, how do you get this balance yourself? Did you manage to get it or not? And if how do you do that?
Okay, so I'm gonna give everyone a piece of advice. You need to read a book called 4,000 Weeks. So 4,000 Weeks is approximately the number of weeks you get in an 80-year lifespan.
Mm.
And the guy who wrote this, and I recommend reading it, the guy who wrote this says, forget work-life balance, forget trying to clear your email inbox, forget trying to clear the decks. It's impossible. No one will ever achieve it. It's a Sisyphean task. He said, instead, consider yourself individually as time, and then just make conscious decisions about choosing what you do with your time. So that means, do I want to do this particular project that someone's approached me about? If you don't want to do it, then you say no, and you therefore choose and do the things that you wish to do. Some things in life you don't have a choice over what you do, because you have to do them, otherwise we can't live. But I reading that book has made me reframe how I manage my time. So now I think I have a much better balance across work, university work, NHS, family, and recreation time. So yes, it's definitely achievable, but you have to reframe it.
Yeah, perfect piece of advice to finish off with that. Thank you for joining for the podcast and giving us the time. And hopefully we might have you again once hopefully you get breakthroughs through meningioma work and with future achievements in your neurosurgical research career. Everyone, thanks for watching the podcast. Please subscribe to the channel. We have a wonderful lineup of guests coming up over the next few weeks. And please let us know if you would like to see special guests or specific people on this podcast. Thank you.